Talk Show.
Recorded live. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Genesis Science Fiction Radio Show, a service of the BlackScienceFictionSociety.com website. I'm your host, William Hayashi, and this is the May 30th, the last show in May 2014. Our special guest tonight is Alicia Mccalla, and we had a little thing about how I pronounce her name, and some pointed questions about just how she feels about her husband's name, as she said. and where you, Alicia, welcome to the show. Thank you for being here. And where are you coming to us from today?
Well, right now I'm living in Metro Atlanta. I've been here for many years, but I am originally from Detroit, Michigan. Detroit in a house.
And did you pretty much grow up there?
I
how much
did.
time did you? Okay. Schooling, elementary school, high school.
Yeah, I'm actually a legitimate Detroiter. I grew up in the hood, Northwest Detroit. I went all the way elementary through high school in the city. I graduated from Cass Technical High School, which was, I guess, back then it was for the smart children. And I'm trying to think. I grew up right in the Grand River Greenfield area, but I claim that whole region. So my grandmother was 7 Mile and Roselawn, so I'm all Northwest Detroit.
Cool. And so I'm sure all of our listeners from the area know exactly where you're talking about. I've only been to Detroit. I've been there once. I went there with it was an advertising and marketing firm, and they were pitching some ideas to Oldsmobile. And one of the things that I found out about Detroit is if you go to a Kinko's or any place like that and you have any logos for any of the major car manufacturers, they won't allow you to copy that stuff. And we had to convince them that we were advertising people trying to pitch something.
And you needed to be able to make the logos.
Yeah, and then I had to explain to the manager, hey, look, here's exactly what it is. We're from Chicago, we're from Leo Burnett, and we're here to pitch these things, and this is our last minute changes. And finally, the guy, said okay, but boy, it just surprised me how protective they were. And when was this? This was in the 90s, so they were very protective of, using Oldsmobile's logos. That's what it was. They didn't want us to use any of their logos. And I guess you could see why. I mean, it's like all the copiers where you're not supposed to be able to copy money and things like that. People want to protect intellectual property and stuff like that. But we're getting off track here.
It is kind of, I was thinking, when you go to Kinko's, most people want to copy the dollar bill.
Well, you know what?
Not Oldsmobile.
Well, yeah, before they all of the multicolored and made our money look like play money, it was fairly easy to copy, to copy a $100 bill, especially if you bleached out the cotton, of a $1 bill and printed 100. I mean, people got away with that all the time.
Yeah, they got away with murder. Okay, so William, I have to say this. I have talked to many people about visiting Detroit, and no one has ever told me that type of story. They always have all kinds of other Detroit stories, but never anything like that. So you are special.
Well, yes, I'm actually. A lot of people have accused me of being short school bus special.
Oh, Lord have mercy.
I'm just kidding. But I mean, I don't want to take up your show, but we got there. This was in the middle of the night, and this is the last thing I'll tell about my Detroit experience. We needed some place to eat, and we were staying at the convention center downtown, but it had not. There were no restaurants in it when we got there. It was everything. It was under construction. So someone directed us to a bar and restaurant owned by Otis from the Temptations.
Oh, yeah, okay.
And we went there, and we were eating, and there was a bunch of kids in the back, like late teens, early 20s, somethings. And what was happening was the older ones were buying drinks for the younger ones. And the waitress was getting mad and cut them off. And then some merriment on their part ensued. They were hollering and stuff, and then they left. And I swear to God, 5 minutes later, a tactical SWAT team swarmed in all the doors of the restaurant looking for these guys. And while they were in there, the guys were driving by in BMWs and stuff, honking their horns, waving at the cops.
Okay, so that sounds like a Detroit story right there.
Yeah, but I don't want to paint Detroit in that way, but it was just so funny, you know. All of these things. Oh yeah, we're in Otis's restaurant, and then the SWAT team showed up. So I think everybody in our group. That's a lot of Detroit story right there. That's what my husband said. Some good old fashioned violence. Okay, I love my city, Detroit, but. You know. Well, I like it. I mean, first of all, it's got such a great history.
And
you know what? The people who come from Detroit are really they've got some stuff on the ball. There's some really creative people who come from Detroit. I mean, obviously you're like a media specialist. You're no slouch in the brains department or anything like that. But some really cool people come from Detroit, and it's unexpected because, of course, in the national media, nobody expects that.
No, I think one of the hardest things for me was I left Detroit to go to graduate school, and that was probably in the mid-'90s. And, you know, that was a time, it's almost like now when I walk around, and I've been in Atlanta for almost 20 years, you know, I see so many people who are my age who graduated high school with me, or we all kind of just gravitated, you know, leaving Detroit. And I think that was a huge drain, you know, because it's almost like my parents are still there, my grandparents are there, and then younger people are there. But, you know, that mid group, what are we, Generation X? It's kind
something
of
like that, yeah.
Yeah, missing.
So there was
that
you're saying there was a migration away from the city of that age group?
I wouldn't think so, yeah. Quite a few of us are just gone. I mean, when we went to our high school reunion, mostly everybody was living pretty much somewhere else. There's quite a few there. But mostly we're all somewhere else. And that's a hardship on the city, I think.
Well, yeah, but, you know, right now, I believe, this is what I believe. I believe that the movie RoboCop, the first one, was prescient about what's going on in Detroit today. Detroit today is becoming a corporate-run municipality, completely corporate-run, and there's a lot of money being passed around to make sure that happens. And so when you think about what's happening in Detroit, you've got conservatives who are finally saying, well, and they're pricing the lower class and the lower middle class out of housing in the interior of Detroit. So they are looking at, you know, putting together a whole city devoted to much, much wealthier people. And I think that this is going to be the model for a lot of cities if people don't pay attention. And it makes
I think
easy.
what you're saying is, you know, you said they're pricing them out. When I went home a couple of years ago, there was no pricing out. There was no houses. There's nothing. It's vacant lots. You know, now it's just becoming blocks and blocks of emptiness. What author was that? She kind of, Nalo Hopkinson, I think, kind of wrote a story that I think exemplifies, you know, this walled-off city. And that's kind of what you're starting to see, you know, around. It's just you have the city of Detroit and then everything outside, and people wanted, you know, people have always, of course, wanted to separate themselves from the city of Detroit or from what they didn't like about it, but I think it's getting quite worse now. So that has framed my writing. Just being a Detroiter, growing up in Detroit, and seeing some of the things that I've seen, you know, we could talk the negatives about Detroit, but I think some of the positives are Detroit was a great place for Pan-Africanist thought, for Afrocentrism. I mean, and
Mhm.
that was the one thing that I grew up. I remember in school we had to sing the songs Young, Gifted, and Black. You know, in my parents' basement when I would go and dig around in boxes and find things to read, you know, I would read stuff like Angela Davis and the autobiography of Malcolm X in middle school, you know. I mean, and for me, because I was that weird kid, I would mix those books with, like, Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. And so
Wow.
I think I have that sense of social activism and that sense of pride, but also that ability to think outside the box and be intellectual and to think about scientific ideas or think about what if questions. And so
Mhm.
for me, that's been something that's a part of my life. You know, those two worlds are always having my feet in those two worlds of social activism, but also thinking about, you know, what if our society was X, Y, and Z way. So I think for me, writing dystopian literature is one of those ways to explore some of those things, but, you know, also think about, you know, how things could be as far as people of color are concerned, because that's something that's missing from science fiction and fantasy.
Well, well, not so much now. I mean, you look at the growth of the blacksciencefiction.com website,
Mhm.
and the number of Black creatives who have grown around it. Okay,
Mhm.
who are great participants, and you know, and I in no small measure, that's what draws me to the community, you know, as a writer, and I definitely like exploring the memes that you just discussed. You know, what if, you know, what if we could be by ourselves? What if we were absent debilitating influences, cultural influences that constantly try to break us down and keep us from realizing any kind of any kind of success even. I mean, just success. I mean, look at the forces arrayed against our first half black president. I mean, these people have lost their minds.
Yeah.
And it's not just people who are pissed off because the South lost. It's just a lot of people are worried that their built-in white entitlement is going to disappear. And of course, you know, in psychology, people always ascribe the behaviors of other people or the possible behaviors of other people based upon what they would do themselves. So when you look at a dominant culture in America that looks at how they have treated non-whites ever
Mhm.
since they stole this country from the native people, they're terrified that they're going to experience the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune that they visited upon the native peoples and those they brought over from, you know, Europe, Africa, Asia to do their bidding to build this country. So
Yeah.
so to look at literature like you are, I think is something that's very healthy and very natural because, well, just in my case, I wrote about, you know, blacks secretly living on the backside of the moon for the last 50 years.
Mm.
And then, you know, without whites knowing. And the thing is, okay, if that did happen, what would be the response? And that's the fun thing to play with in literature for me is, well, so what would happen? Who would
Right.
do what? You know, how would people behave? What's the first thing whites would do? Well, the first thing whites would do is what they do in industry, what they do in community, and what they do with every endeavor that anybody can make a buck at is they try to take it over. And so that's
Mhm.
a pretty cool concept because if you just take the memes of the reality of today and you write around those memes, your stories are going to ring true, and your stories are also going to, I believe, you know, foment the imagination of black readers, young black readers, who probably wouldn't have thought of that.
Right. Right. I would agree with you on that. I mean, that sounds like an interesting premise for a series. Can I take that?
Well, you can try. I just finished the third installment of a trilogy, so somebody's going to copy you on that. Somebody's going to say, "Ooh, she went on his show and tried to steal his stuff."
I just posted a link on the chat room when we were
great.
talking. There was this lady who wrote this book. Now I'm trying to remember what it was. Some kind of reviewing Eden, and it totally, I think, exemplifies what you were talking about. You know, that kind of white privilege fear. I don't know if that's the case because, of course, I have my friends who are white who will go, no, I don't feel that way, you know. But I do think that there is a sense of entitlement. I do think that there is a sense of that, you know, that backlash. Like what, you know, we've done all of these things and now, you know, kind of the chickens are coming home to roost and we need to be dangerous and leery. And on the other side of it, you know, because, you know, as black folks, we make good jokes, right? Me and my husband laugh, and he was like, you know, black's not in anymore. Once Barack gets out of office, it's over. They're going to never let us free. And, you know, that's kind of hard for some people to deal with as well because it's like, okay, a lot of people are going on this assumption that, you know, we've changed and there's so much more openness and so much more freedom in regards to race and gender and sex and, you know, but honestly, you know, people are kind of where they are with these things and we're maybe not as far as we think we are. And there's still tons and tons of healing that needs to go on before we can move forward. I mean, it is the 21st century, but I'm hoping before the 22nd century that, you know, we'll be able to deal with some of these issues in a way that helps us evolve as a human race. And I'd like to see that, you know, before I pass away. But if I don't, I can write my what-if stories and help people get there.
Well, that's the point. You know, sometimes what-if stories are, I mean, they're huge because what they do is they present ideas, and ideas are the most dangerous weapons that anybody can fight with. You know, yeah, you can get a gun or you can drop a bomb or you can do that, but once an idea takes hold, it's almost impossible to eradicate it. So, it, you know, literature, you know, any kind of sociological memes, anything that comes out of that, you know, the growth of an idea from either literature or a movie or something like that. Those are probably the best ways of influencing culture without, well, I just think they are. It's just one of the best ways of influencing culture. So, I mean, when you're growing up, okay, you're in Detroit, you know, and I don't want to ask how old you are because I'm just going to assume you're younger than me. But when you were growing, well, no, I mean, when you were growing up, and you had this window on the world with the literature that you were reading, and you were reading a lot of stuff. I mean, you know, Douglas Adams is not normally what we would consider, you know, obviously a black genre book. But to mix all of that up, how did that all, you know, tell us how it kind of shaped your creative mind and how that, you know, how that impacted, you know, the way you expressed your creative universe.
Are you asking me about nuts? Maybe.
No. I mean, you know, when we're growing, okay. I mean, for me, when I was growing up, there was a series of books called the Tom Swift books. And this was about a kid whose dad was an inventor. He was an inventor. Yeah, they were all white, but, you know, but still, you know, that was something I read. And my dad had a huge science fiction library. So that influenced me a lot. And then right outside the bathroom reading for us was all of our, you know, our research books, you know, the Time Life Library, Encyclopedia Britannica. They tricked me. They sucked me in because they sucked that stuff outside the bathroom, And when anyway, so that that influenced me a lot, but it didn't manifest itself until just 2001. So that's a long time to grow up and not realize that I had any creative part. You apparently were expressing your creativity, or at least realizing your creativity, much younger. And I'm wondering how that kind of came out when you were living in Detroit.
I don't know. I think that I started writing. My mom says I started writing as young as 6 years old. I was always very creative and very inventive. Maybe you might want to say that she was one of the first black hippies. I'm not really sure, because she took me to stuff that I don't think other people were doing. Like, we did yoga, and I learned how to meditate when I was 10, and she would take me to places like the Silver Mind Control Center, where people would talk about being successful, and you're not a victim of your circumstances. And occasionally I had family members who were, I guess, either members of the Black Panther Party or something like that. So sometimes we would go to the BCN, and there I would learn about the cultural identity. So I think I had a mixture of different things going on at one time. So I learned to really love to be exactly who I was in my skin. Not to be embarrassed by it or sad by it, but to be proud of my heritage and not to be a victim. And I think that's an important frame of reference, at least for me. And so my mom was one of those people who was very supportive of the artist or writer in me. And so, as I was growing up, she would take me to programs like at Marygrove College for kids, and we wrote stories, and, I was able to freely, let the stories flow, even though they were weird.
Right.
I just want to make this caveat, though. I was a hood rat. The hood rat should not be reading science fiction books and should not be talking science fiction stuff. And, it was a bit of embarrassment, I think. Now my uncle, he was a few years older than me, and he's kind of like a big brother. We would fight all the time, and he would take my science fiction and tell me, you can't be reading that white trash, because, he had some street creds that he needed to keep, and I was kind of embarrassing for his little niece to be reading these science fiction stories. But on the other hand, I had a warm place to, just be free to write and say. So if I wanted to write about spaceships, then it was okay for me to write about spaceships, and I was able to do that with no problem and no pain. I do think that you were asking me in the beginning about my career and being a librarian. I have always been around libraries, and I would get on my little 10-speed bike, and I would ride up to Sherwood Forest Library. I would ride up to our neighborhood, my neighborhood library, and I was friends with the librarians, and I was friends with the young librarians who would give me the books that they kept underneath the cabinets that you weren't supposed to read, because I could read. My reading level was so much higher than everybody else, and so
sure.
I learned to read and research and just be free and tell my crazy stories. And I did that for many, many years until I got to college, and I became an English major. And then I learned that my literature wasn't that great, right? So I stopped writing, I think, some in college, which is kind of sad. And I didn't read either.
So you were self-discouraged to write in college, and if I get this right, because you didn't think that your writing was of sufficient quality?
Yes, yeah, I think so. It was all about being an English major. I don't know. I think I had always been more of a gifted kid and student. In high school, I was science and arts curriculum, so I always had a mixture of the science and the arts. And then when I got to college, I got accepted to Yale University. And back then, my mom was like, oh, no, you're not a black girl. You're not going to Yale, Connecticut. That's too far. And so then I was like, how about Michigan State? She was like, no, that's party school. And so she sent me to Oakland University, and they gave me a full scholarship. But, oh, my God, like, there was only, like, I want to say 400 students of color out of thousands of whites. And so I would, like, go across campus, and the first Indian kid, I was like, hey, how you doing? We would, like, hug each other because you would just be, in this sea of whiteness. It was kind of uncomfortable. And so I was really finding myself at OU, finding who I was, not just as an African-American, but as a woman. And, I was always challenged, and they would say, well, Alicia, what do black people think about this? And I was like, oh, I don't know. Why don't we ask all 10 million of them? I can't be the spokesperson for all black people. So there were some things that went on there as far as being a student, an English major. I became Miss Cultural Diversity, and so I just kind of lost my way as far as the writing of stories. I did do some other things, like I started a magazine on campus for African American students, and I participated in doing things like public relations and that kind of thing, but I didn't write my stories, and that was hard for me, I think. It was a lot of years that I just missed out. And in between there, I also joined the Marine Corps to help pay for school. And so I was in the Marines, which was this, it was worse to be, being black wasn't as bad as it was to be a woman. So I would go to school, and I faced racism, and then I would go to drill, and I would face sexism. So it was like I just picked up on all these isms, and so that framed something about me, but it stopped me from, just writing novels. I was writing other kinds of things. Maybe that's a good thing.
Right.
A good way to say that.
Yeah, so then what was it that brought you back? What was it that allowed you to feel at least free enough / fulfilled / back in that comfort zone where you had been previously? What brought you back to that and helped you get back into, restore your creativity in terms of writing?
Well, I went for many years with just kind of writing simple little things, not getting too intense. But if you really want to know what truly happened to me, I was hit by a truck. And
I hate it when that happens.
I lost my memory, and I said, doggone it, if I can get hit by this truck like this, I don't want to die before I write my novel. And that was in my late 30s, I think.
Were you badly injured? I mean, you don't have to tell the extent of it, but was it bad? I mean, obviously, losing your memory is a huge thing.
Yeah, it was.
There's so much identity tied up in people's experiences. I mean, how was that to kind of be cast adrift like that?
It was kind of it was horrible. It wasn't to the point where I was completely hospitalized. It was just several hours, and I guess I had small concussion, and it took me some weeks to get myself back together. And finally, when I did, I just determined that I had stories to tell, and I made my goals and my dreams around that. And so I just took up writing seriously. And, instead of just having little snippets all over the house of all these stories over the years, I just actually started finishing them. I actually started writing full out, full novels instead of just, oh, here's a, how you get these splashes of things. Instead of just doing the little splashes or not taking my time seriously, I actually started taking my writing seriously.
And so it was kind of like, excuse me, a lot of people, well, I presume a lot. I haven't talked to people, but your your creative inspiration, rather than coming as like a small singular idea or something like that, you actually created out of whole cloth. You know, you would have an idea and then you would carry it to its ultimate conclusion. I mean, that's great. I mean, to go from nothing, have a truck hit you, which, I mean, I'm going to tell people right now, that can ruin your whole day.
It did. It was a bad hair day.
Yeah, so
my husband and son, they came to the ambulance or something, and I say, little boy, don't cry, because I couldn't remember his name.
Right.
Was bad. Yeah.
Do you have any long-term effects from that? I mean, do you find that, you know, in some ways it affects your creativity, or even, you know, sometimes something like that can leave you a little more tired in life too?
Well, I try not to be tired. You know, I think that probably some doctor out there says, yeah, you probably still have some loss, some memory loss. But, you know, I just don't live my life like that. I just choose to think of things positively. I had one of my aunts, she had cancer, and she passed away some years ago, but she had stage 4 cancer, actually. And when she finally did pass away, the doctor said, we cannot believe that she was as ill as that, because her temperament, she was just so beautiful, just so full of life and full of energy to the end. And, you know, I just determined, you know, if I got to go, I'm going to go in good moods and spirits and positive. You know, I want to flow in that good light, in that good way, you know.
Well, you know, doctors, psychologists, I mean, the entire medical industry knows, I mean, I don't want to say industry, knows that a positive attitude can have more of a healing effect, or help your longevity more than just about than any pharmaceuticals can.
Yeah.
Because you know, I believe from my own experiences that we have all kinds of untapped potential. I believe that you know, we've seen people who practice, you know, spirituality to a very deep extent can do things like they can affect the healing of their body and the, you know, their health and things that are inexplicable to normal Western medicine. So I think your attitude is probably going to be something that's going to be great in terms of carrying you forward. So anyway, you start out writing whole novels at that time. About how old were you when you started doing that again?
Doing the full novels, I'd say in my late 30s, maybe around, I started getting 36, 35, 36.
And
around.
So, you know, of those earlier novels that you started putting together from your ideas, did you take them all the way to publication?
No, because they sucked.
Really? How so?
They just weren't. They weren't as good as they could have been. Maybe that's a better way. They were first drafts. One of the things that I did do, I started looking for ways to learn more about the writing process, because you know, I'm a natural researcher. You know, I became a librarian, and at the time I was working at the college level. I was working at Georgia Perimeter College when I signed up for Seton Hill, the MFA program. And so I went to Seton Hill, and I took my stories with me. And I'll never forget, I mean, it was really a grueling experience, but a part of me learned a lot from it. I was the only African-American woman there in their science fiction track. And the professor, at that time, they had that workshopping format. So everybody went around the table, and people would say things about your stories, and the professor would give you his ideas about what you should do. And so, you know, I kept waiting, you know, for the professor to get to me, and every time they would come by me, he would say, "Oh no, we're gonna take you at a different time." And so finally, everybody had their 10 minutes in the sunshine. So they finally got to my story, and my 10 minutes or 30 minutes of, I guess I can't say the H word, but it was 30 minutes where they just ripped my story to shreds. People just went after it tooth and nail. The professor went after it, everybody. So here I was, this poor little black girl, surrounded by all these men, and there was one other white woman in there. I can't remember what her name was now. But they just really went to town on my stories. This is not believable. How did you do this? Where did you, how did you come up with this story? And that actually was the beginnings of my first novel, Breaking Free.
Okay.
But it was just a hardship. I actually left there, and the little girl who was in there, she was kind of like, your story really wasn't that bad, but I didn't want to stand up, kind of, but I want to tell you, they're just mad because they wish that they had came up with that story idea themselves, and so she went on and on, but it was painful to go through that. But what I learned was I did have some holes in my story that I needed to work on, but I also learned that you have to be careful, when you're first sharing, when you're first putting your work out there. So I left and went and cried, like a baby, because, the people just attacked myself so much. And so it took me maybe a year after that to finally say, okay, those people, that was their idea. That was a good first draft. Let me move on to the next one. And that's what I did. I had to pick up and keep going with it. And now Breaking Free actually won the A&B ovation. And when people read it, they say it's just an awesome story. They just enjoy it. It has a black girl who's a protagonist, and she's genetically enhanced, and she's trying to save her mom from this evil mind swipe procedure. So it has all the great things in there that are completely science fiction, but it's dealing with issues that relate to a young African-American teen.
So, do you consider it a young adult novel, or is it for young adult and all ages?
Well, I would consider it more new adult.
Okay. All right.
And I would say more new adult, because as a school librarian, I wouldn't buy this for my middle schoolers. Young adult now is more like middle school, maybe the first or second year in high school, 9th or 10th grade. And my character, she's actually 17, and I would consider her new adult, meaning she would probably be like a junior, senior in high school. Maybe the readership could go on up to sophomore in college. So some of the themes there, are more for the older teens, I would say. But definitely people who are, in their 60s have said that they enjoyed this. So that makes me feel good.
That's great. And how long has that one been out?
Breaking Free came out in 2012. I had a small publisher who picked it up for me. And it's been out since February 2012, and I was supposed to finish book 2, which is Double Identity, but that is a sore wound. That's one of those off-limits questions. You can't answer what happened to book 2 yet.
Don't feel bad about that, because I swear to you, I felt exactly the same way you did. My first book was published. I self-published in 2009. I had written it in 2001, and finally just got off my butt and had it. So, but then because it was, I was stupid enough to put volume 1 of the Dark Side trilogy on the front. Everybody's going, well, okay, we read the first one. When are you going to cough up the second
one? I know, it's horrible.
I didn't know, my mind had not worked out the plot for a second one because the second one was going to be hard. And I know exactly about the ducking you're talking about because because it's not, it's not so much other people pushing me, but it was that I was not able to execute in the time frame I wanted to.
Right.
Is that how you felt? It was more an internal pressure? Okay. Okay.
And so I thought, okay, I've written Breaking Free. I've kind of got that one done. And, I wanted to keep working on the series, but it took off faster than what I could, handle. And so I kind of thought, let me try something different. And it just so happened at the time that Milton Davis, they were talking about doing something Sword and Soul. And I thought, I'm going to write a little short story for that to see how that goes. And so I wrote a little short story. And, of course, people who actually know me, they think, oh, Alicia, she's just a sweet little librarian, but there's also the Marine in there. So the story that I wrote it was really kind of gory and had horror elements. And poor Milton was like, we can't use this one, Alicia. I was like, okay, Milton. So I took the little story and I was like, what am I going to do with this?
That kind of begs the question. Let's go back to, you took that class and you had all of that resistance. You had all those people cutting down your book. Or your story. So it may not have been perfect, but do you think some of the criticism was because what you had written was unexpected, and excuse me for using the words, for a girl? Or well, you know what I'm saying though, right?
Yeah.
Or was it? Now that you've had time to reflect, you've cleaned it up, you've done, you've gotten to where you are now. Did you find any of the criticism valid later after the crying was done? Because that's obviously that's part of the process. That's part of the creative process. Doing the editing, cleaning up the story, making it more poignant, or fleshing out your characters better, or any of 1,000 things writers have to go through to get their products finished.
Yeah, and ready, publishable.
It sounds like you drew a lot of strength from the criticism, in addition to at least listening to some of it, or not discounting it or what have you. As you look at the story now that grew out of that, were they honestly being mean because of a problem they had with you, either visually or personality-wise, or how do you see that now upon looking back in hindsight?
I can't be sure about that. I think my first drafts, when I looked at the story just was not in motion. Maybe that's a good way to look at it. It just wasn't. It legitimately wasn't publishable in the way that I had it outlined. Some of the plot points were, because at the time and even still today, my biggest crutch is that I'm a pantser. I just write by the seat of my pants, and whatever comes out, that's just what it is. And, and so sometimes I would write myself into walls, or sometimes I kill off somebody, and I'm like, okay, where am I going to go with this thing next? And so I think in some ways that's probably right. It really wasn't publishable, and I had to come to terms with that. I did leave Seton Hill. I didn't stay with the program because even though I knew that, I needed work, I couldn't work under that kind of a pressure. And that's why I learned that MFA programs perhaps were not for me because, maybe I was just like a little bit overly sensitive about things. But I do think it pushed me to the next level and helped me to flush out the story and flush it out in a way that it made great sense. So is it a story for girls? Well, yes, you have a girl there. But again, I have, I think, a lot of action in my stories. And I actually had several boys to read my stories and go, oh, they love it because of the action, because of the fighting, because of the, because of the adventure that's in the story. So
Sure.
I think I did that part. I'm actually pleasantly surprised at the number of boys who will read it, even though that romance stuff was in there. As a matter of fact, a couple of my middle schoolers who were just about to graduate, I wouldn't let them read my book, but I gave them a copy this summer before school, and then I said, you guys, I want you to read this and tell me what you think. And so here are my little 8th graders. They read it, and then they brought it back to me with this note. Mrs. McCalla, we love the story. We love the accent. But could you cut out some of that kissing in the book?
Yeah.
It's like, why we got to have all of that in there? So, I mean, but they're younger-ish, so they're 13, 14-year-olds. I've had...
Well, wait, were the boys and girls asking you to cut out the kissing?
No, the girls never do.
Okay, I was just wondering.
The girls never do. So I tried to add a little bit of romance. I tried to add a little bit of adventure, all those things in there.
To broaden the appeal, right?
Yeah.
And also to create, a lot of people don't realize this, but at least it's my belief, when you write a story about people are not one-dimensional. People have all kinds of things that go on in their lives. And sometimes if you ignore something, you do it at your peril, because then people seem to feel that, well, maybe this isn't a real character, or they're not fleshed out, or so what's his real motivation? What's her real motivation? And sometimes when you ignore a vital component like that, you're doing a disservice to the the universe you're creating.
Yeah.
So it's good that you write with broad appeal.
I also wrote with interracial relationships. So XJ is actually in love with Brandon, and XJ is a girl who her parents were revolutionaries, and their goal was to overthrow the biomedical branch of the government called CAGE. And so she's coming from that social activist tradition. I mean, people who even are willing to take up arms against the government, versus Brandon, who is actually very rich and, can have whatever he wants, and even has a girlfriend who's perfect for him, the perfect blonde that's for him. But he chooses XJ. And so their relationship is rather torn, because not only do they have the question of race, which in this genetically enhanced world, maybe race is less of a problem as it is or their designation type, the abilities that they have. But then they also have to cross that chasm of classism that's very difficult sometimes for people to cross.
Right. So it's a big story.
It is.
When you talk about, and I don't bring it up for anything other than, the construction of the universe. When you talk about, wanting to get a second volume out in this universe, it sounded like, from the way you described your writing process, that you just write from the seat of your pants. You just start writing and writing and writing, and don't always know exactly where the characters are going to go. So when you turn your thoughts to this second edition, do you have kind of an idea, a framework of what's going to happen?
You know what? I think I do actually kind of have an idea of the direction that it's going. And, I've actually started to, jot down ideas. But, that creative process, sometimes it needs to percolate. It needs to kind of, you got to actually develop it. You got to actually give it that time. Or if you put it out too soon, it's simply just not good. And so that's what I was facing, when I got to volume 2 or book 2. I just, I wasn't ready yet to share it with the world. So I actually did have a draft of it. And and I actually was going through it and, sharing it with my editor, but it just it wasn't quite clicking for me the way in which I thought the series should be going. And so I kind of tabled the idea for a minute, much to the chagrin of some readers. Like, when are you coming out with the next one? But I shifted my focus a little bit. And, since I work with children most of the time, I was like, let me try something for adults, because I never done that before.
Right.
Most of the stories that I had written had been for young adults or new adults. And I kind of felt I understood that world. So then I start working on my next series, which is urban fantasy, or people might call it paranormal romance. But, it's a series that's steeped in, it's got some dark horror elements. It's got some mythology. So I've kind of mixed African mythology and Norse mythology in a series about ancient evil who's coming to take a woman's child to help to replenish or to revive or reincarnate her own child. So it's actually got underneath it, serial killer is there. It's actually, in comparison, these two stories are almost night and day. And with the horror elements, it adds a creepiness to it that most people, it's hard for them to be able to deal with or to tolerate.
And so the people who read your writing, do you think that they have any kind of, is there any pushback on the fact that you are a woman and you do tend to write, it sounds like you tend to write in what would be a non-standard, something that people don't expect from a woman. And you mentioned before that, okay, part of that is the influence of being, your Marine experience. Do you think people take that into consideration, or are they just kind of taken aback by the fact that it's different? It's not exactly what they expected. Because you could be writing great, stories, but sometimes people get into, it'd be like if Stephen King wrote a love story.
Yeah, it might be hard for him.
That would have been a different Tommy Knocker altogether.
You mean Carrie was not a love story?
Well, I mean, if you love your car, yeah. If you love your garbage disposal, yeah. I mean, but do you think you will experience kind of any resistance because people are going to read this next series that you're putting together, and it will be different?
Yeah, all of that. I mean, I think the hardest thing for people with me is, well, even when I was in the Marine Corps, nobody ever believed I was a Marine. It was like, first of all, the voice, and I was really petite then, and I just didn't look like, a killer. Maybe that was the word. I always laugh. And I was like, well, if I hadn't been a Detroiter before I joined the Marines, maybe I would have been a pacifist. But I grew up in Detroit, so there is no way for me not to be a pacifist. I mean, I think that's hard for people because people have their preconceived notions about you from, what you do or who you are. So the nice librarian should not be writing stories where people are getting their heads chopped off. For some people, that's really uncomfortable for them. And not only do I add the level of, the violence that's there, but I also add those issues that pertain to Black women, such as domestic violence and, such as the Trokosi slave wives in Africa and human trafficking and, mixed in with African mythology and Norse mythology, along with questions of racism and interracial relationships. So within my stories, and I would say even in the Genetic Revolution series, I have all of these deep controversial issues that in the end of the story need to be healed, but you got to go through a lot of darkness to get to, that that ending or get to that happy place with the stories.
Sure. And do your stories generally end happy?
Well, after some heads get chopped off, yeah. they end at that soul searching place. Mhm.
Some of that just has to go around. Some folks don't know how to behave. And, if you cut off the head of their friend, sometimes that conveys to them the seriousness of what it is you're trying to do.
Of the circumstance. I think you're right.
Well, but you've got such a great mix of upbringing. You've got kind of like you grew up, and I don't know class-wise, but you grew up with middle-class sensibilities because you had what would be considered more liberal leanings in the kinds of things you read. You read a lot, and then you decide to go be a Marine, and so there's a lot of depth there in terms of experiences, in terms of perspective, and in terms of just what you've been exposed to that I think would be rich fodder for any kind of creative universe.
I would agree.
So, okay, so you're going to kind of table the second book in the first series. You're going to start on the second series. What do you think your timeline is going to be for maybe getting out this first book in a more darker vein?
Well, I actually put out a short story. So the short story that Milton kind of didn't like. Well, I probably shouldn't say that on air. Hopefully he's not listening. But the short story that I put out, Iniko was the kind of sword and soul story that I was coming up with. I put that out last summer, so that became a novella. And then Flea was a very short story. It was only like 24 pages. It's what started the whole this whole new series off. And so I put that up on Amazon maybe the year before that. So it actually hit number 13 on Amazon in African American women's fiction.
Wow.
Yeah, it was actually a lot of people like that story. Quite a few downloads on it, and it's a free short story, so people can go and download it from most distributors. They really enjoy that story. But Flea, I think it has the mixture. It deals with a woman who's actually she would be what you call submissive or a weakling. And she's actually being abused by her current boyfriend. And, she wakes up to the idea. She gets this box from her grandmother, and she begins to exhibit these abilities or these powers. And her daughter begins to exhibit these supernatural powers. And she kind of hears this voice that tells her that she needs to flee. She needs to leave Detroit, and she needs to go to Atlanta to reconnect with the father of her child, for whom she actually lied to him and told him that she had an abortion, but she really didn't have an abortion. She had this child. And so you kind of go through this series with her where she has memory loss, and she's trying to figure out who she is and what she is. And as we go along, we realize that she is a warrior woman and she is strong. She just doesn't know it or hasn't got to that point yet. So this whole series then is about how this woman who has experienced serious violence, domestic abuse, and has really low self-esteem, but the one thing that she always had was her daughter, and now this ancient evil is wanting to take her child away. And so she has to dig deep inside of herself and find that part of herself that all black women have to do, and to be strong. And so that's what this series is about. Her becoming this weak woman, tapping into her warrior self and using her heritage and her culture to get there. It's a very interesting series.
It does sound like it. hang on a second. You're listening to the Genesis Science Fiction Radio Show, a service of the BlackScienceFictionSociety.com website. Join, get your friends to join, find a rich benefactor, whatever you can do. This is the May 30th, 2014 edition, and we're talking to Alicia Mccalla. To say that you're a librarian,
Mhm.
I mean, that just sounds, it's, well, what does she write about? The Dewey Decimal System? No. and that's the other joke, what do they teach you in library science? Well, how do you, how much do you have to know about the Dewey Decimal System and things like that? But there is a science to it, and the fact of the matter is, prior to the Internet, organizing knowledge was a profession that people just don't suspect the depth of. They don't understand that when you're talking about, even electronically, when you talk about the accumulated knowledge of what we have today, there's still the need to organize things so that people can find out what they want to find out. When I was heavily into the library, I went down there and they were I went through the card catalog. That's how we found things in the library. So I think this is a kind of a cool dichotomy that there you are, librarian, are you an ex-Marine or are you still practicing?
Oh, there is no ex-Marines. But no, I haven't been in Marine Corps in years.
Okay, no, I know there's no such thing as an ex-Marine. But you're not drilling, you're not, they don't call your house and go,
I'm too old for that now.
There's a couple of things in Afghanistan we'd like you to straighten out. You don't get any calls like that. And yet you're also a writer. I mean, this is a pretty rich life. And a lot of people discount the fact that, well, she has a family. Well, family, that's like a full-time job. People don't, a lot of people still don't understand that. Unfortunately, it's mostly men. But so let's talk about how you organize your life to facilitate, the creativity that you engage in. When you, in terms of writing, let's take a typical week, or even let's go from a day to a week. How many hours do you write? Do you have a certain method? Do you have certain rituals that help you get into the groove? What's your creative process like?
Well, I am one of those kind of people. I'm a morning writer, and it's hard for me to explain to people how I got to be doing what I do. But I'm one of those people that I try to take 5 steps towards doing that thing which I love. And if I can take those 5 steps every day, then I'm much happier about it. So, when I originally started taking my writing seriously, I just started doing those 5 things. But it's not like what it was today, for example. In the very beginning, it was something simple like, let me just find 5 minutes out of the day. Because you're right, at the time I had a young child, and, I had my husband and I, we were both working. He was in school trying to, get his doctoral degree. So we, we've been very, very, very busy family. So I didn't think in terms of, let me sit down and write this novel. I thought, what can I do every day? So in a year or in 2 years, I can have something done. And so I just started small with those 5 steps towards whatever that was. So if it meant me reading a craft book, it might take me a week to read it or 2 weeks. But I would read 15 minutes every night before I went to bed. Or, if I wanted to learn to write a scene or to do something, I would just take that time. I would just get up and set my timer and say, okay, I'm going to write for 15 minutes. And that's kind of what I did. So at my son's football games, I would take my little journal and I would just, write at his practices or at his games or something. I kind of made it fit within my life until,
Right.
Now, I probably write 25 to 30 hours a week in addition to my full-time job. But I usually get up every morning about 4 o'clock. I will exercise for about maybe a half an hour. And then after I exercise, I'll come in my office and I'll sit down at my computer. And, I can usually write about 1,700 words in, 50 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
And I usually can work for a couple hours in the morning. And then when I come home, I probably do my social media in the evenings and finish up or start thinking about what that next scene will be like in the evening before I go to bed. But I do get in the bed. I try to get in the bed, at least by a decent hour so I can get, a good 7 to 8 hours of sleep.
Well, if you're getting up at 4,
Mhm.
I have to just express my admiration. I mean, if folks want to see me at 4 in the morning, they can sleep over.
Oh Lord.
I'm telling you. I mean, that's. But I'm a night person, and for me, I write at night again for the same reason, because it's quieter. When you're writing off hours, it's much more difficult to do when people can call you or they're stopping by,
right,
or whatever, and so I'm very familiar with that process, and I do understand the need and what it feeds in you, because if you're actually going to treat writing as a serious endeavor, then you do have to treat it as a part-time job.
Yeah,
and the
do.
fact that you have a routine down where you can go and you it's almost like you're punching a clock. At 4:30, by 4:30 you punch the clock, and now it's writing or editing time, right?
Yes, it is. And I actually have to put my mind in that way. I do have friends, a lot of my romance writing friends, they actually are able to write full time. So they spend their whole day, writing. And in the very beginning, I was trying to kind of, do some of the things that they were doing, and I was having a very difficult time. For one, I know that I can't work on multiple projects. I can just finish one book at a time, and so I have to kind of focus on that. So, I kind of go, okay, I'm working on this project, and this is what I have to do, and this is the amount of time that I have to do it, and then I just go through that. I don't split myself up in many different parts.
Right.
Because when you do that, that's when you have issues. I also try to be very selective with my time. I was on the board for Georgia Romance Writers for some time, and that was very difficult when it started to get to be like my writing time. I would get up in the morning, and instead of doing writing, I was like answering emails for Georgia Romance Writers, which, it is what you do when you're on the board, but it was taking me away. The little bit of time that I had to write, I was doing something else with it. And so I've had to learn to really covet that time and spend it for exactly that. If it's writing time, then I need to sit my butt down and I need to get my story out or turn my story out. It's not time to do Facebook or Twitter or, that kind of thing.
Right. So, okay, well, it sounds like you have the discipline down, and obviously you can finish projects because you published. What are some of the, writing is only one part of it, and right now, for you, what about the business side of it? Do you have a business infrastructure? Do you have editors? You mentioned that you've got a publisher. Take us through that a little bit about how you go about the business of doing business as a writer.
Well, I actually put on the chat there that my writing is a part-time business instead, and I really had to focus it that way. I do enjoy working with the publisher that I have, But the short story, that when I pitched the idea to her, she wasn't quite as interested in that series. She kind of wanted me to stick with my science fiction, and she was like, "What are you talking about? You're a young adult, new adult writer. Why are you talking about writing this adult stuff?" And so a girlfriend of mine was doing self-publishing, and she was like, why don't you just self-publish, put your stuff out there and see what happens, see if people will like it. And so this adult series is actually my own in that it's completely self-published. My cover, my my idea, my marketing, all of it. And that's actually it's been rather freeing to do. I've actually enjoyed doing it. And so I do have an LLC, and I do look at it as more of a part-time business rather than just being like I'm a writer for someone else. I'm writing for my business, and I actually enjoy that. There's a bit of freedom, but also I think this new wave of self-publishing is a way of cultural change, artistic abilities that artistic visions and ideas that are being shared now. When you can go directly to the reader, you no longer have that publisher in there. People are able to find their niche, and maybe the niche isn't that big, but they're able to connect with the readers for the message for what it is that they have out there. And I think that's absolutely phenomenal. At least in my perspective.
It has made publishing, the publishing of books especially, very, very accessible to everybody. But what we're also seeing right now is we're seeing a rash of purchases where these big mainstream publishers are snapping up all of these independent little publishing and fulfillment houses because again, for them, half of it is they want to corner the market, and the other half is they want to make every nickel that they possibly can. I think
quite a few of my friends who started off self-publishing, especially in romance, they end up getting, contracts to the big houses. So it's almost like self-publishing has become like a route for the traditional publishers, the New York publishers, to find new talent. Because, of course, the cream always rises to the top. And so if they're topping the charts, they're like, they don't have an agent or they don't have any contracts. Let me pick them up. And so there's some of that going on too.
Well, it is true. I mean, right now, a first or a second book or a first trilogy, because nobody's knocking on my door yet. A first trilogy, that's kind of almost like doing a movie short to give people an idea of what the full movie would be like.
Right.
And otherwise, you wouldn't have had an opportunity because, let's be honest, it's been 2 or 3 decades now since publishing houses actually accepted, any kind of submissions from an author. I was speaking to an agent nearby, a North Shore agent here in Chicago, and North Shore is, wealthy white folks. And I said to her, we were just having a discussion, and I said, well, I found out the catch-22 in the publishing business. And I said, you can't find a publisher unless you have an agent, and you can't get an agent unless you've already published. And she said, oh, that's simply just not true. And that also told me, well, let's just hang up the phone and not talk to her anymore because she ain't got the sense of a house plan. But the fact of the matter is self-publishing has leveled the playing field in that you can actually get your book out there. But there's still the need to do your due diligence. You spell check the damn thing.
I
check
know,
your grammar.
yeah. Don't put out bad front.
Don't put your page numbers out of order, or there are hundreds of things that can go wrong. But it does give people an avenue to display their works that was not available just a very short time ago. And with printing on demand, your costs are lower. You know, you don't have to all of a sudden get, Mr. Hayashi, you're going to have to do your first printing of 50,000 books and keep them in your basement until you sell them. You know, that's not a need either. You know, you don't have these, you know, these huge minimums that would have, in most cases, broken somebody. You know, they would not have been able to get their work out. So, I mean, it's kind of cool that you've managed to float on both sides of the fence there. You know, you've got a publisher, but then on the other hand, you know, they're very conservative, as you found out. Well, this worked for us. This formula worked for us. Why are you even thinking about writing something different? And sometimes it's hard to deal with the fact that they're not really about the creativity. They're about the dollars.
Yeah, or what works with their platform.
Yeah,
they have a platform too. I do want to say this though, because sometimes, you know, you hear these stories of like Amanda Hocking and, you know, Courtney Milan and all of these authors who are making these $1 million contracts, and, you know, so it's almost like the gold rush or something. And so people are like, yes, I'm going to put my story out there and I'm going to make it work. Hey, it's a product, right? And you need to fix your product. Wouldn't we all be pissed off if Toyota didn't do their due diligence and just start putting cars out there? Hey, wait, I think that happened to them. They had those cars that kept running and wouldn't stop, and you couldn't press the brakes, you know. People got mad over that, right?
Right. And the other thing is we have a smaller reading population too. So there's far fewer people. You know, you're trying to attract. You know, you don't get the shotgun effect unless, of course, your book gets picked up by Oprah. And you know, you're down in Atlanta, and it's funny because, you know, I was in a couple reading groups up here, and of course all the black authors I ran into said, yeah, I'm gonna write a book, and then I'm gonna give it to Oprah, and then she's gonna have me on my show, and then I'm set for life. See, that was I had to laugh on the inside, because if you laugh in their face on the outside, they get upset.
And I don't know if that's even true, because there's some Oprah authors, and I don't know if they were set for a lifetime. Oh my goodness.
Well, I mean, you know, if we were to be entirely honest, you know, I met the woman who vets Oprah's books, okay, and she was a white lady in her 30s, okay, and she was the one who actually read the books and said to Oprah, oh, this is a good idea for a book. But then Oprah got burned a couple times, and she's very business conscious, and I knew the end of all of that was when she chose, what was it? Some Dickens book, Great Expectations or something like that. And I said, oh, I see. You're trying to bring a brand new author to the forefront so people will discover them. And Charles Dickens, that's so perfect, Oprah. I said this in my head because I didn't want the Oprah Mafia killing me.
Come get you.
Oh, no kidding. But and then, you know, even if she did find out about what I wrote, you know, she would have gone, oh, was that smart ass who was telling me about Dickens? Yeah, I don't want to be that guy. But to what you said just a few minutes ago, you know, if you think you have something that's laudable, then there are certain things you have to do. You have to write a good product. You have to put it together like a real book. It has to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And you know, my fun joke that I tell people is, you know, now that people know that I'm an author, they go, you know, could you help me out with my book? I want to write a book about my life story because I think it would be real interesting. And the thing that I cannot say, which almost comes out of my mouth, the very first thing is, I can't imagine what that could be because you're boring me to death right now. So you can't really say that either. So, you know, when people decide to become an author, it's not just, oh, I'm going to sit down and just write any story. There's a lot to it. I mean, look at the evolution you took to get, you know, that to, you know, you go to that writing class and then they give you, you know, the critiques that they give you, and then you seriously considered those, and that was reflected in how you improved or changed your story.
Right.
For me, I write a story in 2001, and it doesn't get even self-published until 2009 because it wasn't. I wrote a 750-page book.
Ooh.
Well, that's crazy. First of all, you can't
you
publish a
birthed right
750-page.
Yeah,
But you can't publish that if you don't have a name. Nobody's going to publish, Hayashi. Let's get that book from Hayashi. That's 750. Okay, if you're Tolstoy and you're dead, it's easy. Okay, but I would, so you have to do your due diligence. You have to do the things that are necessary. And a lot of people don't understand that. And the part that we just talked about is it is a business. If you're going to write a book just for yourself, then you're writing a diary. Okay, people go, oh, I'm not writing.
But if you're writing a diary, you might not want to go back and reread that either.
That's true. But if you say, well, I don't care about what other people think. I'm just going to write what I'm going to write, and that's not a business decision. The 750 pages. Well, Al, it got cut down to 500 pages. I had an editor who took a lot out of it, which was good because it was I did exactly what you did. I had a framework of an idea, and I even had a kind of a flow chart of how the plot would go. But it was the first thing I ever wrote, and like you said, when you just sit down and write by the seat of your pants, especially when you're new, there is a lot you don't know. And you can't discount the educational process of learning to be a writer.
Right. Yeah, you have to learn how to put story in motion. You have to learn you can't be, what do they call those people, conflict phobes. You must have conflict in your stories. Otherwise, you just have a bunch of talking heads. It's like, is this a bad screenplay? What is this, right? And people, I think, sometimes don't understand, why don't they love my story? It's not even about that. I mean, it's only your first draft. I think maybe you have to write like 1 million words, or maybe you even have to throw away 1 million words to really get to the true meat and depth of the story that you want to tell. I mean, and that's difficult because quite a few people, like we're talking about me writing at the seat of my pants, but I also am very meticulous with the editing, I go back 2 or 3 times and, okay, am I saying the right thing here, with that true intention of fleshing that story out. And that's difficult to do sometimes. So the one side of my brain is great with the pantsing because that's fun and it's exhilarating. It's like play and creativity. And then you got that internal editor, and it's like, oh, yeah, you got to clean that up. Get rid of that. You need some punctuation here. And that's hard for some people because you got to turn on that other side of your brain and look at your work from a different perspective and try to say, okay, how do I make this better? And if you don't know how to make it better, then you got to read craft books, or you got to find someone who can take away that mystery for you to help you to really dissect that work to get it where it needs to be. And quite a few people, I won't say that they're lazy. I just think that they feel like it should be easier to do. To be a producer of words, though, it's a challenge.
It really is. And the other part that I find is, authors will come to me and say, hey, can you read what I wrote and let me know what you think? And I find far too many people are not able to take criticism. And I understand that. I don't have a problem with it anymore. I had a problem with it maybe at the very beginning. But the thing is you can't just listen to yourself as your own cheerleader. You have to let some other mind outside your head validate what you're doing. And then a lot of people don't have a strong enough ego because they feel that if somebody's critiquing their work, they're being invalidated as a person, rather than somebody saying, well, your product you've got a great idea for a story, but your product needs improvement. Man, that's a great car. You invented a car that runs on water, but put some wheels on the damn thing. Otherwise, it's not going to go anywhere.
Right.
Yeah. So that's
even now, after I've written so much, sometimes I'm just like, oh, I got to fix that. That's bad. And then if I go back and I read, what I've used to, some of the work that I've written before, I'm like, oh, that was awful. Who read that? So you kind of work through it. I mean, but I think it's a constant process. If you want to be a master author, if you want to be that person who has that great product, then you got to keep working on your craft. You just have to learn how to do both sides of it, not just the free writing, but also the editing. And then if you're self-publishing, then you've got to pick the right covers, and you've got to pick the right message and the right platform that you have out there. And you got to find those people those readers who will be attracted to your work. And that's a big feat for some people. It's not just like you put your book out there, you put your one book wonder out there. What is that song by Vanilla Ice? Ice Ice Baby. I think he never made anything else, or maybe he did. But that's all he had was that one song, which is kind of cool. But you need another. You need, if you're going to build a business with your writing, you have to have more than just that simple stuff. You've got
and if you're starting,
to build it.
I'm sorry, and if you're starting out alone, people don't realize that publishing your own work is a left brain and right brain endeavor.
It is.
The creative part can end up being the smallest part of what you have done. Yes, you've written a great story, but going through the publishing process, that's huge. I started the publishing process for my third book today, and this is probably something that's going to take 4 or 5 months. And people go, well, why can't you just upload your files and get it out right away?
Oh,
and I go, it's not it's not like that.
No. With the old black folks like, don't put that out there yet.
Yeah. Or worse yet, you'll give it to them and they'll be looking at the pages and they go, you didn't actually put this out there yet, did you? And then you go, oh my God, okay,
right?
Yeah. So,
and you asked me about this series that I'm working on. I've actually written about 85,000 words on this the adult series. Soul Eater is the Soul Eater series, and
right.
I have completed book 1, but I'm holding it close to the vest.
Why is that? Why are you? Is it for a timing thing, or is it for effect, or is it because you just don't think, or are you really at the it could go out today stage for that?
I am at that point where it could go out today, but I think that it's an episodic novel, so I'm trying something different. And it's in 3 parts, and I've just about into the part book 2. I'm mostly into book 2 and the beginnings of book 3, and I want to release all of them at the same time. But when I do release them, I want it to be a continuous flow, and so I'm just leery right now of just releasing too soon. Because things are still changing in the world, So as I get closer to the end of book 3, I'm just like, I got to go back and make sure that all those plot lines are tight, that I've done my due diligence. Because there's such depth in this series, I did tons of research on the African mythology and the Norse mythology and the swords and the Adinkra symbols and all this stuff. I want to make sure that part is correct. And so, I'm just holding it for right now until I get them all done, and then I like to release them. And my goal is to be able to get those all out before the end of this year.
Wow.
So I'm working hard.
Well, something that I remind everybody who is kind of on a creative clock, be sure to make your announcements here, and if you have like a book signing or a publication party or something like that, come back and post it on the BSFS events calendar.
Oh, yeah.
Because there are so many BSFS people in the Atlanta area and travel through there. So if you have an event coming up, the chances of somebody looking on the calendar going, oh man, I can go to that this Saturday or whatever, is pretty good. And then, it's always good to meet people who are kind of like they have an affinity for your kind of writing. The BlackScienceFictionSociety.com is exactly that. It's Black science fiction, fantasy, and horror, and written by Black authors. And so being able to have your it's almost like having your support group be able to come out and go, yeah, heard you on the radio, wanted to see you.
I love that.
That's pretty cool.
I definitely need a support group, either a support group or a therapy group. I'm not sure which one I need yet.
Well, therapy isn't bad for everybody. I mean, I would love to do that too if it wasn't for this ankle bracelet. But I mean,
bracelet.
I would get out a lot more. But all kidding aside, I mean, seriously, keep us up on, what you're doing, because, again, Jarvis, the administrator of the site, he's committed to traveling to 5 different shows, I believe 5 or 6 different shows this year, so that he can go around and meet the people and mingle with the people who are most closely associated, the affinity people in writing, in creating, film, animation, all kinds of stuff like that. So it's great to get that kind of positive feedback from people who know exactly what you're doing and exactly what you're going through.
Okay.
If you were going to look ahead, let's look ahead like 5 years. Okay? Where do you think you're going to be sitting 5 years from now, and how much of your work do you think is going to be floating around out there that far ahead? I know that's a tough thing to think about, but since you're the one who mentioned, I got a schedule, I'm holding my stuff back because I don't want, I want it this way, that way, and the other way, and the hell with it, what everybody else wants. But do you have kind of like a timeline for how your creative universes are going to be exploited, by yourself, obviously, and get out there for people to kind of, be able to groove on?
Well, it is my lifetime goal to write 100 novels. And so that's what I've been working on, just trying every year to, be able to put out a certain number so that by the time I get ready to get out of here, I got my 100 novels. And so right now I'm thinking I would like to be able to it's my goal to get to 3 to 4 novels per year. If I could do more, because there are some prolific authors out there who write 6 novels per year, and that would be so awesome if I could do something like that. But it's, within 5 years, I would love to have about, 12 to 15 publications out. Whether they all are full-length novels, I'm not 100% sure, but I definitely sense that I could do novellas, which are probably about 40,000 words. Short novels would be great. So far, my word counts have been somewhere between 50 to 55. So I guess for some people that would be kind of short novels. So I'm thinking in 5 years I'll probably have somewhere between 12 to 15 publications out. That is my goal. And I love fantasy. I love urban fantasy. I love paranormal. So hopefully a smattering of different things. I wouldn't mind writing a ghost story. I wouldn't mind on my website, if you go there and take a look, I have this fairy with guns, right? So I really want to write her story one day soon.
Yeah, I was looking at her.
Do you like the fairy with guns?
Yeah, but put a jacket on her, okay? Because
you sound like my middle school boys.
I'm just kidding. Look, I have a healthy appreciation for the female form. Some would say too healthy, but I love I love her wings, and finding out. See, that's intriguing. You look at a character like that, very pretty, nice, and not not over the top or anything, and she's got wings, which I got some private questions about that.
Okay.
But anyway, but see, the fact is, when you create compelling characters that people want to know more about, that, I mean, that's the essence of being a good writer. Because then people turn around and they go, you know, she did that thing with that girl with the wings. Remember, she had the girl with the wings, and so that's another thing. When your creativity is not mainstream, because there's a lot of mainstream ideas out there. Well, let's look at the trends. We've got vampires. We've got Game of Thrones. We've got all kinds of tropes that people are exploring because they're popular.
Right.
And finding something that's completely original, like Black Folks on the Moon, is not so easy.
Yeah, it's difficult.
But that's that when you do find a good idea and you manage to pull it off, I think that's the essence of true creativity. Because we can all think of an instance where, let's say, what was that show, Breaking Bad. Okay, so here's a guy who gets cancer, and because he's not making a whole lot of money in his life, he's worried about what his family is going to do when he's gone, and if they're going to spend up all of their life savings trying to save him. So he becomes a meth chemist. Okay, that's a pretty good premise. You know, obviously nobody thought about that premise before because it was brand new. It was interesting. Or if we go back to earlier TV, The Sopranos, who would have thought that a mob boss would be going to a psychiatrist? You know, or Twilight, who would have? Never mind.
Well, I'm going to tell you, when Twilight came out, before it became Twilight, I read that book, and I was like, who put these sappy vampires in here? I couldn't stand it. And then all my little girls and all my girls were like, oh, Miss Mccalla, I just love this Twilight. And I was like, oh, I just want to shoot the vampire in the head. Can somebody chop his head off, please? I'm sorry.
Well,
I hope there's no Twilight lovers out there.
But you're exactly right. People look at stuff like that. You look at what's popular in common culture, and you know, the tendency is to want to emulate it just enough so that people are familiar with the meme. They they can, the Hollywood log line. Well, it's Twilight but with racing cars. You know, and then all of a sudden somebody in Hollywood goes, brilliant, and they do that.
Well, they like those high concept, what do you call the high concept series?
Yeah, but a fairy with guns.
Yes.
Just saying that. I mean, just saying that is cool. A fairy with guns, and you go.
She's a daughter of She's a daughter of darkness. So she's actually a dragon fairy. I mean, my cover designer, we talked a lot about her wings. That was a big deal. So I'm actually glad that you liked her wings, because we didn't go with even traditional fairy wings. Those are dragon fairy wings.
It looks a little Japanese in its construction.
Kinda,
in its artistic construction, yeah. Yeah.
Which I like a lot, yeah.
Yeah. Well, anyway. But it sounds like you have no dearth of creativity in terms of storylines, plot lines, and things like that.
That is the one thing about my brain. I tend to have tons and tons of story ideas. I just have to be able to write faster to get them out.
Well, do you think you have any? Let's go back to the thing that brought you back to writing. Do you think you have any real long-term effect or long-term damage from the accident that you were in that kind of brought you back to writing?
Physically?
Yeah.
No, I don't think I have any damage that way.
Cool.
But maybe it opened up some psychic thing. I don't know.
The brain is very flexible. I mean, when you have damage to your brain, I'm not saying all damage, but when you have a certain amount of damage to your brain, the brain can reconstruct itself in ways that have even proven to improve creativity.
Right, right.
So, you never know. And then that's also another kind of cool, popular sci-fi meme where somebody has, some sort of brain injury or they get hit by lightning or something, and they manifest something that's new, and that gives you the excuse. That's the premise to do something that can be pretty wild. Now you've mentioned the 2 series that you got. You've mentioned that you want to try to do 100 novels in the time that you have left on this earth. That would seem to be a lot of ideas.
Yes.
And you said you have no dearth of creative ideas. In your writing process, did you ever run into having the legitimate writer's block where you wrote yourself into a corner, where you got to a point in the story where you had a tough time getting back out, or it took a lot more effort to be able to climb out of that kind of that mental quicksand and get back on the road? And if you did, do you have a process for that?
I can't honestly say that I have suffered from writer's block. What I can say is I suffer from writer's knots. Sometimes writing by the seat of your pants, you could write yourself into a wall, or like I said, you kill off the wrong character, or you don't know maybe where do I go here. I find more times than not I fall out of love with a plot line that I'm going with, or I fall out of love with a direction that a novel is heading, and then all of a sudden it just sucks to me, and then I can't keep going, and I have to go back and try to figure out, okay, why did I fall out of love with this? What's the real problem? And I think sometimes with newer writers, they don't understand that you can hit these places and that you still need to sit down in that seat and you still need to write or think or ponder on, okay, how do I fix this? That's what's very important. So for me, I tend to get knots a lot. I tend to get stuff all, I have so many plot lines or I have so many things going on. It's like, okay, how do I unravel this to be able to tell a better story? And so I actually work with my subconscious before I go to bed. I might read I'm a huge journaler, so I do a lot of journaling. So I might read my notes that I had from my journal the night before and then get up in the morning and say, okay, subconscious, I need you to work on this and help me to straighten out these ideas so that when I get up in the morning, things will flow for me. And more times than not, that kind of works.
Yeah, I have found that one of the things I think that's been most valuable for me is learning how to write in the traditional discipline of writing. So, reading books by John Gardner, going on how to be a novelist, and going to writing classes, and you'll run into writing classes where you find the meme, those who can write, those who can't teach, or they become critics, bastards.
Yeah, I know the feeling.
Yeah, so I think getting the fundamentals down. I mean, this is important in sports. People say if you're having a tough day in your sport, go back to your fundamentals.
Right.
And I think that even with mental exercise and with the creative writing process, going back to your fundamentals is also helpful, because then you can look at that plot line that you fell out of love with and you go, oh, here's where it went south, or here's where it doesn't make sense because I can't climb out of this hole. I did something with my last book that almost made me cry. I actually threw away 3 chapters because I went wrong. I went wrong, and I'm telling you, having written 3 chapters, that's probably, 15,000, 20,000 words.
Yeah, you threw that away?
Okay, I didn't really throw it away. I put it in another folder. But don't tell anybody.
Okay,
don't tell anybody on the show.
Those are deleted scenes, just like in a movie.
Yeah,
you can't be throwing nothing away, man. You got to hold that.
Well, but see, the thing was, I truly had messed up. I had truly messed up. What had happened was I wrote myself into a corner, and things were out of order. It was never going to be right. And I looked at it for like a night, and I'm thinking, oh, if I could just maybe if I could just rewrite a little bit, I can salvage this. Finally, I had to say, William, you got to quit lying to yourself, man.
And just go ahead and rework it.
And just go, oh, man, that was hard. But again, I went back to the fundamentals. Okay,
and that is a sign of
what's moving the plot forward, and why is this part here not moving the plot forward? And once you have the educational discipline of understanding how to write, it does make it a lot easier.
Yeah.
I mean, I can write like a 250,000 word novel now in 5 or 6 months. And I don't say that to brag, but I say that because I studied my craft. And that's the other thing. I didn't get to be a writer like I am by not studying my craft. You didn't get to be as good as you are by ignoring the fact that a story has to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. Something that something very fundamental that a lot of people don't pay attention to. So, for you, does going back to the fundamentals, I mean, when you get to that point, how did you look at it? Look at where you had went. Oh my God, am I black? Where you had gone wrong, and what was, how do you reconcile yourself to that? Are you able to just make a clean break, start over? Or do you, obviously we all want to salvage something, but do you have the discipline to recognize when something really isn't writing and then go ahead and stop it?
Yeah, I think that is a sign of a true writer, author. You have to be able to know, what is that? I don't remember the old saying about you pay the guy because he knows exactly where to knock, right? I mean that's it. I mean you have to understand that, when you go back in that editing process, there may be some things that you may need to delete, some paragraphs that you need to change, or a character that doesn't quite exemplify the theme for which you were trying to work on. And
sure.
For me, you might put those deleted scenes on your blog, or you might share them on your Twitter feed or something.
Well, kind of like DVD extras.
That's exactly what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Now, as a self-published author, those are the kinds of things that you want out there, so that people, as your readers, could get something extra, from you, some sneak peeks or something. But, I mean, I think getting back to the basics or getting that foundation of craft are very, very important. I think one of the things about writing that I've found, especially in the very beginning, was that a lot of times the mystery is not easily unveiled. And so, now when there's a new craft book that comes out or some workshop that comes out, and I look at it closely and go, oh, I don't need that, right? That's not a good one. Who is this person? Why did they write a craft book, right? I mean,
right.
It's like I kind of know my intuition and everything. That experience is there, and so it tells you that's not going to be very helpful, But when you're first starting out, you don't know. You have no clue. You've never experienced it, so you kind of go with things, and you learn minimal, but you still, the veil is still there. So I find there are certain craft or people who write craft books who are really great with removing that veil and helping at least me to get to that point where I can understand, okay, this is what I'm trying to do right here. This is a thought stream that I need to do here. These are emotions that I need to add here. Or this is action that I need, or here's some techniques for editing that I need to pull out from. And, and I was willing, at least in the very beginning, to pay to go to some of these workshops. That's a lot of times when I hear people that are new writers or new authors, they're not willing to, they're not willing to pay. And they don't want to, it's like they don't want to give up any books. They're like, oh, I can just do this. It's kind of like, okay, so you're going to build your own house with just a hammer and a few nails, right? don't you need some cement?
Yeah, a lot of people do that, though. I mean, you have people who think, oh, I'm going to be the next big thing in rap music, or you have a kid in high school who thinks, oh, I'm going to be the next great basketball player, or this, but to neglect the fundamentals, there's an educational process for every process, including including the creative ones. And as you said, some people think that they can just come out of the box and do it.
Yeah.
I'll give you a good example. Maya Angelou just passed away.
Yeah.
And her writing is so compelling. And she was here at the University of Chicago, and she was talking about the fact that that was one of the things that made me believe in the fundamentals of learning your craft and learning the tools, the actual tools. Learn grammar, learn all of these things, because all of these things matter when you tell a story. And so you look at somebody like her, and you look at her words, and you say, here's someone who has accomplished and who has nearly universal acclaim. And she's telling you, learn how to read before you learn how to write.
Right.
And if you don't pay attention to that, then if you're not going to pay attention to someone like her who knows exactly what she's talking about and has a track record that's enviable. A lot of people go, oh, I'm going to really miss her. Oh, she was so compelling. She was so this. She touched my life in so many ways. What are we going to do? And my answer to them is raise up the next one.
I know.
Okay. If it's not your daughter, then it's your friend's daughter. If it's not, if it's not them, then maybe it's you. But learn your craft, and that's something that I think maybe we're kind of a lazy society in that a lot of people don't want to put in the effort necessary to get good. I just as an aside, I played very, very good tennis. I played professionally. I played in college. I played in high school. And when I coach and things like that, people go, oh, my God, look at your stroke, blah, 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 blah. How can I be like you? And I'll tell you, and I say, here's the secret. All right, I haven't told anybody this in a long time, but since you asked me and since I know you really want to be better at it, here is the secret. And they all kind of, lean in to hear what I'm saying. Hit 1,000,000 balls.
Write 1,000,000 words.
That's the secret. Write 1,000,000 words. So you've got the fundamentals obviously are very important to you. You went to school. You learned those. You're still learning, and that is cool. You can separate the wheat from the chaff, because you can look at some people. Oh yes, we're having this writing, seminar, blah blah blah, and you look at it and you go, well, first of all, I don't recognize any names in there. Yeah, I don't recognize any of your names. Who are you? And you don't want to waste your money, but there are some very good. There's adult education classes in English that people should be taking.
Right, just to learn how to do the punctuation correctly. Right, but before you go on, I do have one thing that I want to say, because this year, well, actually in the last couple of years, we have lost some great lights to the world. Yeah, like Nelson Mandela and Amiri Baraka. Chinua Achebe, and now Maya Angelou, and these people left such an indelible mark on our society. Just change your frame of reference, the frame of doing and being. It's hard to think that they're gone, because they had that mixture of social activism with, or what do they call, making the personal political, of turning our society on its end and making people reframe and rethink who and what they are, and that's powerful, to say that light will be different, But I think we need some of that, as an educator. That is the one thing that I see. One of my students, former student, she put on her Facebook page this girl's tweet that Nicki Minaj gave more to black people than Martin Luther King Jr. You know, it was like, Nicki Minaj, really? You know, I mean, but that's the level of things that our young people are dealing with. You know, when we first started this conversation, we were talking me growing up in Detroit, and I remember my mom putting my hair in Afro puffs and going to school and singing to be young, gifted, and black. I'm not even sure this generation of kids even get that or understand it. You know, even when I talk to some of my nieces and we were talking about, well, who are your female role models or who do you look up to? And, of course, Nicki Minaj was the top of their list. You know, I mean, this is what you aspire to. And so then
Not Beyonce?
No, Nicki Minaj. Seriously.
I was making a joke.
And I asked Beyonce. Well,
yeah,
I would have took Beyonce over Nicki Minaj.
Me too. Yeah, I mean, if for no other reason, you know, our young kids can learn from Beyonce how to be a successful business person.
Right.
You know, they don't even look at it that way. They look at it, oh, well, she's got the clothes, she did this, that, and the other thing. And I think the two wastes of space are these two that just got married. Never mind. I don't even want to say their names. But you're right. Who is going to? And I don't want to call it carrying the torch, because you know what? Every generation should be different. Every generation should be bringing something newer to the table. Every generation meets newer challenges and different challenges. You know, like today. Well, look at how we were talking about the state of Detroit. You know, Detroit is being taken over by a corporation, by several corporations. I mean, it's just right out of RoboCop. So, you know, you go home, what are you going to see 10 years from now when you go home? Are you going to see, you know, this ultimate gated community, which is actually a whole city now, you know, where let's be honest, where they don't want black folks to live anymore? Right. Or what are you going to be faced with? And all of these changes that are happening culturally are things that we all have to deal with, and our kids all have to deal with. And so, how do we get them ready? Right. You know, how do we get their minds in a place where they can? That happening culturally are things that we all have to deal with, and our kids all have to deal with. And so, someone's got to mute this guy. So how do we get their minds in a place where they can?
Did that work?
Yeah, Jarvis has fixed it. But how do we stimulate their minds and give them the tools? And the fact is, we can't give them the tools. They have to want the tools. You know, you can't make kids do anything anymore, because first of all, they have a 2.5-minute attention span, and second of all, if they decide that what you bring to the table is worthless to them, you will lose them forever. Yeah. So we've got a big job, and I think creative writing is one of the coolest ways of putting that together.
Yeah, I think science fiction too. One thing I do notice about this generation of at least with my students, they are very much more open to that what if question, you know. And you know, my kids always ask me, Ms. Mccalla, I know we got Hunger Games, we got this, but you know, where are the black characters at? You know, they're ready for those protagonists of color to you know to share their story. They're looking for that. They're combing the stacks, looking, why isn't it here? You know, they get frustrated because that's just norm for them. You know, these children now, they have grown in a world where they have a black president.
Exactly.
That's, you know, the expectation level is completely different.
Yeah, his election was a game changer. I've mentioned this quote before, and I would like to bring it to give it again. And this is something Isaac Asimov said, and I think it has so much to do with me being a writer, and most of us who have written, who create things, you know, for the next generation or for this generation to look at. And Isaac Asimov said, individual science fiction stories may seem as trivial as ever to the blinder critics and philosophers of today. But the core of science fiction, its essence, has become crucial to our salvation if we are to be saved at all. And I mean, he wrote that so many years ago, but it's so true today as it was back then. We're coming up on the last minute here. I want to thank you very, very much for showing up. I mean, this has been a delight for me.
That's awesome. I wondered if people have questions, because I see somebody was saying they wanted to ask a question.
Oh, well.
Too late, huh?
I guess they'll have to type it in because we're right up on. We started right on the hour, and we're right up against the the hour. But anyway, again, thank you. We'll have you on again because as new things happen, we want to revisit with the people who helped make this place such the extraordinary place it is, and I'm talking about the BlackScienceFictionSociety.com website.
Well, I want to thank everybody. I appreciate being asked to come on. You guys have been awesome.
Mhm. And hopefully I wasn't too hard on you. Jarvis is our peerless leader. He's going to take us out of the show.
Okay.
And then if you'll just hang on for a couple minutes after that, we can do a little bit of chatting, okay?
All righty.
All right. Jarvis?
All right. Hello, everybody. As always, I want to thank everyone for participating on the show, for sharing the show, for tuning in, listening, for just being part of this whole process of spreading the word about Black science fiction. Alicia, your work is outstanding, and we want to thank you I want to personally thank you for coming on and sharing, sharing your background, your experience with us. Because I was sitting here, I was learning new stuff as I was listening to the show, and I'm sure others have learned some new things as well. And you really sound like a leader in the genre of Black science fiction, and how you share your knowledge with us is really appreciated.
Oh, that's awesome. Thank you so much, Jarvis. I appreciate you.
And it's good talking to you. It's been a couple of years, but let's not let this happen. Let so much time go past.
Okay.
Again, I want to stay in contact with you and what you're doing, and please share what you're doing with us on the site and on Facebook.
I would definitely do that. I appreciate you.
And people don't know that a lot of people here now, that they're new school, they don't know you're old school.
I am.
You've been around for a while, and you supported us, they don't really know that you supported virtually everything that we've done from day one. And so
I'm a little quiet. That is true. In the very beginning, I was very active. I think I was like one of the first people to put the badge on my website. I was like, this is cool. It's a Black folks doing science fiction. And then I did the State of Black Science Fiction with Milton and Balagoon, and that kind of grew into its own little thing. But I love the Black Science Fiction Society. I try to advertise and go there and hang out, and I've met some really unique people there. That's a great site to participate in, and the Facebook group as well.
Thank you so much. It's appreciated. And thank you, Will. You always make it entertaining.
He does with his ankle bracelet. I was like, what kind of jury is that?
Well, there's just I wasn't always just a writer. I have skeletons in my closet like everybody.
Okay, sounds like mausoleum.
Well, a friend. It's funny. I volunteered at a place, and I actually, somebody cracked on me. I said, very, very soon, because I've been trying to get in shape and things like that. I said, very, very soon, I'm probably going to have the body of a 25-year-old. And the guy said, well, are you going to chain it up in the bedroom, or are you going to put it in the closet?
Lord have mercy.
Yeah. But anyway, look, this was great. You made this very, very easy. It was great talking with you, and I hope it wasn't too hard for you.
No, it's wonderful. Thank you guys so much.
Anytime. All right, on behalf of the BlackScienceFictionSociety.com, Jarvis, Alicia, myself, I want to thank everybody who listened. and who tuned in. Please tell your friends that this show is on every Friday. It starts at 9 o'clock Eastern Time, and we do welcome, all the people who participate. It's a joy to see people show up, and I want to thank everybody and have a great weekend ahead. So on behalf of everybody here, good night.
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 Night.